One. Yes. Good evening, everyone. Yesterday
Peace.
was first and foremost. Yes, I have my guest, Eagle of God, with me. We're going to try as much as possible to pass the International Criminal uh, Court of Justice's ruling yesterday with regards
Mhm.
to the temporary measures as requested by the South Africa against the state of Israel. And yes, it does make interesting reading, but first and foremost, I'll allow my guest to introduce himself.
Yes, good evening, everybody. My name is Azuike Madejibea, Eagle of God. We're here sitting just to see if we can walk through some of the uh, information that was rendered yesterday on the justices at the ICJ as they've instructed Israel to carry out 5 steps, with a sixth to be reported within 30 days.
Okay.
So, this is what we're going to try to unpack within this
Yes.
short
Unpack we
space of time.
shall. Headlines across the world reads, for example, in the UK Guardian, it reads, the UN court orders Israel to ensure acts of genocide are not committed in Gaza. And by that, the interim judgment was delivered on Friday. The president of the court, Joan Donoghue, said Israel must take all measures within its power to prevent acts that fall within the scope of the Genocide Convention and must ensure with immediate effect that its forces do not commit any of the acts in the convention. Although it must be said, the court did stop short of granting South Africa's request to order an immediate ceasefire to the war. That statement in itself is a bit problematic, which has destroyed as much of the Gaza Strip and has killed more than 25,000 Palestinians. Let that number sink in. 25,000.
25.
The president continues that Israel must take all measures within its power to prevent killing Palestinians and causing them serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction in whole or in part of the Palestinian group, and imposing measures intended to prevent birth of Palestinians. That is some heavy statements. I mean, first and foremost, it says the Israeli military must stop.
Yes. Yes.
Do we do we see any signs of that happening?
Well, before we could even answer that question, we have to understand what they have already been saying, let alone
Hmm.
what they are currently doing.
Mhm.
Um, they have stated that they're going to ignore the ruling before it was rendered yesterday.
Wow. Who
So,
did?
is it then a moot point that the justices have rendered their verdict? No, it's not moot point. If
Hmm.
the countries in the international community are going to abide by this highest court in the world,
Mhm.
and they're all signatories to the ICJ,
Mhm.
the point is not moot. This then falls
Oh.
upon the other countries who are supporting Israel, Germany, United States of America, the primary backer, and the United Kingdom, where
Mhm.
we live,
Mhm.
that they must impose upon Israel to change its course in what it is doing. Because
Hmm.
as we can see, humanitarian aid is not sufficient, medical aid is insufficient,
Mhm.
hospital treatment is ineffective, with children having their limbs amputated without anesthetic. This is a crime.
Hmm.
This is
That's
torture.
like going back to the Crimea War.
This is barbarism. Many
Hmm.
children are having their legs and arms amputated by their own fathers, who happen to be surgeons. How's
Hmm.
how's a surgeon supposed to cope under that duress?
Hmm.
How? And so, if we say that they are to provide humanitarian aid, that means there can be no bombing, which effectively means a ceasefire.
Mhm.
This is not a case being brought against Hamas, who is a political or a resistance or a military wing, however we want to rationalize what their makeup is. ICJ only deals state to state. Hamas is not a state. So
Hmm.
anybody having any disgruntled feelings about this judgment need to understand that their ruling is between states and not between internal conflicts between political parties or players. It's not.
Okay. So, with that said, it will be interesting to hear. I mean, I can read what the response of the South African Foreign Ministry is. It called the decision a decisive victory for the international rule of law and a significant milestone in the search for justice for the Palestinian people, and expressed hope that Israel will not act to frustrate the application of this order, something you've alluded to. And it has publicly, as it has publicly threatened to do, but
Yes.
that it will instead act to comply with it fully as it is bound to do. The Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad Maliki called the decision in favor of humanity and international law and a wake-up call for Israel and actors who enable its entrenched impunity. That quote is powerful.
Very
So it's
powerful.
not just so
Entrenched impunity.
yes.
Those last two words, impunity, because we could then go and look at the list of United Nations resolutions that have been ignored
Mm,
since the creation of Israel in 1948.
hmm,
They've been ignored with the backing and the veto power of the United States of America. And so Israel has got itself into a position where it thinks it can act and do whatever it wants to do. And it has been doing so. And this is, we're just scratching the surface, because in order for it to believe what it believes is to be true,
mhm,
it has been telling its populace, its children, that they are the victims of Palestinian assault and attack. So some children don't understand that Israelis moved into Palestine in a large number,
mhm.
and the Nakba was the forced expulsion of those Palestinians from northern Gaza, and many of them into, northern Palestine, into what is now the occupied territory in Gaza.
Hmm.
This is a problem that they've caused for themselves, and the international community assisted them to do this.
So will it be surprising that the response from the Israeli Prime Minister goes as this? No one will stop us, not The Hague. But he did not indicate whether the ruling would lead to any changes on the ground, but expressed satisfaction that the court had not ordered a ceasefire. Israel's commitment to international law is unwavering. Equally unwavering is our sacred commitment to continue to defend our country and defend our people. Like every other country, Israel has an inherent right to defend itself, he said. End quote.
Well, let's go backwards. Does Israel have the inherent right to defend itself?
Well, according
From
to
whom?
international law, it has
Yeah,
boundaries.
it
Yes,
has
true.
boundaries.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
it has boundaries. And so this is an internal conflict, and to be waging indiscriminate collective punishment against people who have no part to play in what took place in the October the 7th. And you know how we could use whichever word we want to use. They call it attack, I say defense, I say prison break. Defending yourself against people who have been corralled into that small enclosure, many of them for their entire life, who were born there, young
Hmm.
men
Hmm.
who have never seen anything outside of that small enclosure called Gaza. If Prime Minister Netanyahu believes that they are upholding international law,
Hmm.
the videos that many of us have seen say otherwise. And we have seen the United States, the State Department, being grilled by journalists what is to be done? Do you believe that this case has merit? And they've said no. The case brought by South Africa is meritless and baseless. But the ICJ doesn't agree with that.
Okay.
So Israel have got to prove that what they say is what they're doing. It's easy to say, but we need to see their actions, and their actions are speaking louder than their words. So now they've been told they need to provide evidence in 30 days.
As to, but suffice to say, that number keeps growing.
Yes.
I mean, as at the time this report was filed, it was in the 25s of thousands.
And that's just counted the ones that have been found
True.
of the dead
True.
bodies.
True. I mean, I won't even go into what the right-wing elements of the government said, so because
No.
that would just conflate.
I mean, it's from the president down. He said
So,
that
yeah, exactly. So,
there is no innocent civilian, which means they're all targets.
and also the fact that the the further down you go, the more unsavory
They
the
become.
language becomes. So,
Yes.
yes, the president of the court, Joan Donoghue, said Israel must ensure that the preservation of evidence of alleged genocide and must report to the court within a month, just like you said. The 6 provisional measures were approved by a wide majority of the judges, which brings me to this segue. 2 of the judges by 16-1 and 4 by 15-2. Now, we have 2 dissenting voices, but one was consistent in dissenting. And I mean, we could just quickly mention who she was and who she is, and what could be the possible motivation.
Justice Sebutunde from Uganda um, was the justice that ruled in dissent against all of the verdicts, all of the 5 verdicts, that there is no case to be brought
Okay.
to prove the genocide.
But
We
she
know that
wasn't. But she wasn't standing alone.
she was not standing alone. No.
There was Justice Barak as well.
Yes. Yes.
So
this is why people are asking the question, as you rightly posed at the beginning. What is the mandate that the ICJ has? Is this a legal ruling that needs to be enforced? Or because countries are signatories to this body, they should act because a ruling has been given. So therefore, it doesn't need enforcement. The ruling is itself the enforcement. And since they're all signatories to this body, this institution, they must act. Justice Sebutunde seems to think that this is a matter of political and historical misunderstanding. Therefore, the court has no power. But this is not what Uganda has said. Ugandan have said that their position on Palestine is clear, and that is backed up by how they have voted in the United Nations General Assembly, that have always voted for ceasefire, for humanitarian aid, and for the preservation of Palestinian lives, because they are a protected people. So Justice Sebutunde, in her dissent, is standing by herself. That's okay, but the majority decisions have carried the vote, and it allows everybody to see that this was not on bipartisan or fractious decisions by those judges who voted for these motions. So we could take it, even further. The report by Al Jazeera, they asked who she was, where did she go to school, her background, her legal career, and all those sorts of things. That's for us, it's neither here nor there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if the government does come out, I mean, I would say I was genuinely surprised. Not I was surprised. Okay, let me not conflate issues now. I was surprised that the government came out saying they don't quite support her stance.
Yeah.
Because when I was passing sort of my opinion as to how the judges might vote. I was of the opinion that, I gave certain excuses to certain judges as to how they might vote.
One way or
I
another,
mean,
based on their
exactly,
political
based on
leaning. Yeah,
exactly,
exactly, exactly.
But
And we know that doesn't always hold water. That doesn't always hold true. They're judges. Based
that's
on their
the thing.
evidence, are you going to act on the evidence, or with that, oh, my country has put me here, I must vote for the party
That
and be
was
partisan? So I can understand the conundrum that people are going to see, and the judges will be under immense pressure. They will be under immense pressure.
that was my
Yeah.
take. That was my take. Because obviously you're in you're not you the world is pretty unsettled in terms of geopolitics at the moment.
Yes.
So if you observe geopolitics uh, from a historical standpoint, you will know that the motivation of anyone sat in a global body is often colored by where they hail from.
Yes.
And so that was my take. But the rest sort of surprised me. But I mean, Justice Barak and Justice Seputunde, I knew from day one, so
Yeah.
they held they held true. They held true. So which brings us to a very, very important segue now. What does this really mean in terms of the international rule-based order? And maybe to sort of set it up a bit, there was a news report that said in the UK Guardian that said the ICJ Gaza decision shores up the rule-based order and puts the West to test. And let me just delve below the headline a bit. It says, in seeking a provisional order from the International Court of Justice restraining Israel from committing potentially genocidal acts in Gaza, South Africa puts not only just Israel's treatment of Palestinians in the dock, but also the whole post-Second World War rule-based order, including the authority of the ICJ itself. Never has there been a high-profile case brought in the middle of such a bloody conflict, and rarely have so many stakes, so much on the outcome. Wow. You see, that statement alone.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're talking about the International Court of Justice. Why was it set up? That's one.
That's one.
Two, is what we are looking at considered a genocide? If it is, what do we do about it? Three, what the whole post-Second World War's rule-based order was based on what? The idea that we need not fight wars to settle disputes. And so, what do you understand by this statement? Rarely has so much been staked in the outcome. That's quite a loaded statement right there.
Italy have ceased selling arms to Israel as a result of this ruling.
But they've also seized donations to contributions to UNRWA.
Yes.
That's the United Nations Refugee
Organization.
Oh, yeah. In Gaza.
So, if we're going to look as we step back to understand what will be the implications for other state actors, and the court case to understand whether this is a genocide will take many years, maybe a decade. We don't know yet. But the implications, if it is, and the complicity of countries who support Israel, whilst they could have prevented a genocide, will be probably the end of the ICJ, the international rules-based order, or the United Nations itself.
Why do you think it will be the end?
only in so much as that if they don't act to prevent something that we can see for the first time that we have been reading about, which has never been televised in this manner,
Mm-hmm.
we cannot be led to believe that we are not seeing what we're seeing. Nobody can tell us that we're not seeing what we're seeing. And this is why so many journalists have been killed, deliberately so.
Hmm.
The editor of the Intifada.com, the digital platform, has failed to be able to contact many of his colleagues who work and live in Gaza because they no longer want to answer their telephones. Their telephones are being tracked. Israel has told us that they know where everybody lives. And how they're finding people is by their mobile phone signal. So they're simply not switching them on.
But I thought
So he,
journalists were the press was protected
mm,
in war conditions.
yes, well, we know what happened to Shireen Abu Akleh, Palestinian journalist who was shot dead.
Hmm.
And when the world said what happened, the response from the Israeli government was, it wasn't us. The Palestinians must have done it. So their penchant for telling lies
Mm-hmm.
goes hand in hand with them being able to get away with anything that they've been doing for so long. Now the whole world is seeing what they've been doing to children, to women, to men.
Hmm.
An ITV journalist recorded men waving a white flag and one of the group of men being killed. Another incident is a group of people crossing a road, a woman again waving a white flag, holding her child's hand, being shot dead, and the child running away whilst waving a white flag.
Hmm.
You have to answer for these things. You have to answer these things, not just say, we will investigate and get back to you. That's not sufficient any longer. Children are watching this and asking their parents, why is this happening? Especially politicians who are in positions, elected officials. Their children are asking them, what have you done? Why is this happening? So the narrative for the Israeli government has been lost in this TikTok generation, Snapchat, Twitter,
Hmm.
Instagram.
Well, speaking of social media, that is one of the things that has sort of changed, color the water with regards to the coverage.
The coverage, yes.
Legacy media has failed to do what legacy media does. And which brings me back to the famous interview between, you know who I'm referring to now,
There are too many
Andruma,
famous.
Andruma and
Noam
Noam
Chomsky.
Chomsky.
There are too many famous interviews of that caliber.
No, but that one stood head above shoulders. And for those who are watching this now or would watch it later, it's about, I think it's it's about 3 minutes. It's about 3 minutes long. It's quite, but it is powerful.
Powerful.
The interview is conducted by Andrew Ma with Noam Chomsky, and they were talking about information. And Noam Chomsky brought the subject that the only reason why Andrew Ma was still in his place is he self censors himself
At the BBC, mind
at
you.
the BBC.
At the BBC.
At the BBC. And Andrew Ma would say, do you think I censor myself? To which Noam Chomsky gives him, I don't know what, gave him a very good lecture of why he still has a job. I won't spoil it. You need to
Yeah.
go watch. You need to go.
It's almost as brutal as the Democracy Now interview with Dr. Finkelstein and
Finkelstein
Alan
and
Dershowitz.
Alan Dershowitz. Yes,
It's
yes.
it's it's explosive.
Something similar. Something similar. I mean, we're talking about the media, because the media too has been culpable in this
Yes.
conflict.
Yes, very culpable.
Um, the BBC, who I would not often beat the drums for in terms of impartiality, have been somewhat neutral. So much so they've been accused of what's the word?
Bias.
Bias and perceived anti-Semitism.
Oh, yes.
Perceived, that's the word.
Yes.
Perceived anti-Semitism. And but they've held sway. But the rest of legacy media has, sort of,
Capitulated.
they're non-existent actually. Capitulate is to say something is there. They're non-existent.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, look across the pond. New York Times, Washington Post. It reads almost like a press release.
Literally.
So, I mean,
And none of them covered the original court hearings between South Africa on the first day and Israel on the second day. Nothing was broadcast live, I mean, on their platforms.
really,
I don't believe so. I
wow.
think Sky News covered the Israelis' response, but they didn't
Oh,
cover South Africa's first day reading.
oh, well, maybe there was no maybe there was no public interest. That's
Of
okay.
course, there was no public interest.
Okay.
Of course, there was no public interest. Just outrage. How many thousands of people have been taken to the streets here in London? Hundreds of thousands in
Listen,
Glasgow.
them was nah. Come on,
No public interest, of
give them
course.
benefit. Give them benefit of that. There's no, there's no public interest in with
No,
regards to.
King Charles is having his prostate examined.
Well, mm, yeah,
That's important
that's
news.
good. Listen, that's our that's our king right there. You know,
That's the King of England, indeed.
our king, our king. Well, have you watch yourself? I'll let you know that the Tower of London still operates. You might be quartered in the morning if you're not careful. So yeah. Now, in terms of the rules and what have you, the headline says,
Let me answer the other part of your question was
yeah.
what does it mean for the
What does it
international
mean for
rules?
the
Because
international?
we all know what happened during the apartheid regime in South Africa. South
Mhm.
Africa were expelled from the United Nations. They were expelled.
Okay.
If we use Noam Chomsky's description of what is happening to the Palestinians,
Hmm.
it is not apartheid. It is worse than apartheid
Okay.
because the people in South Africa were not being killed because they were still needed to work.
Mm.
But what is happening to the Palestinians, there are dual roads, one for Israelis, one for Palestinians. The Palestinians must go through checkpoints. This is classic apartheid, segregation, which we know comes from Jim Crow in the United States of America, instituted against black people.
Hmm.
So Noam Chomsky says that this is worse than a genocide. Excuse me, it is worse than apartheid in South Africa. Because of that very reason, they have been ethnically cleansed, as Ilan Pape says,
Hmm.
as Khalid Rashidi says in his book, The 100 Years War on Palestine.
Palestine. Yeah.
These things are in our face, and the history is very, very long. So for the ruling of the court must find a way to allow people to hold Israel to the standard that they've held the South African apartheid regime to in the early 80s and the 90s.
Hmm.
They must hold them to the same level of scrutiny. If they don't, then their purpose becomes null and void, which is the point that they're trying to protect against. Because if they don't do something, other state actors or internal political parties are going to struggle even harder because they know that there's no point going to the highest body because they're just going to be ignored. This is the problem that they have.
Okay. So that's one angle. That's one angle. Now, in terms of the language of the charge itself, one country recently stood up to say, I don't think it quite measures up to what we would define as genocide. By that, I mean Germany.
Of course, Germany has knowledge in this field. They are experts in genocide. They
So they should know.
particularly should know what constitutes genocide. If we want to reserve the word genocide
Mm-hmm.
specifically to refer to the Nazi Holocaust instituted against Jewish people,
Mm-hmm.
then that 6 million people is the number that we should aim for when we're trying to calculate or estimate have we reached the level of genocide. If we allow for the extermination of all of the Palestinian people, it won't be a genocide because there's only 2.2 million of them in Gaza,
Mm-hmm.
but they'll be gone. Is this
Mm,
acceptable?
mm,
This is
mm.
not acceptable. It's not acceptable. So, as Germany said that this is not a genocide, the president of Namibia issued a statement. Why would he issue a statement? 1904 to 1908, Germany, not Nazis, Germany exterminated the Herero and the Nama people. What was German Southwest Africa? Whatever they've done subsequently, they learned that whilst murdering black people in Africa. So he told them in his statement that it was unfortunate that they do not remember their history. Over the last several years, the German government have tried to avoid giving a full apology to Namibia, whilst offering them a sum of money, 1 point something billion
Over
dollars,
30, over 30
over
years.
30 years for development funds and projects and such forth. All the while, the remains of some of the living ancestors, the remains of their ancestors, their parents,
Mm-hmm.
are in glass jars in Germany who haven't been buried. So Germany have gall to even speak in this manner, to say that what Israel is doing is not genocide, knowing that we know our history and their history, more importantly.
Mm.
So they should take time in standing firmly behind what Israel is not doing when we know what they have done and have not atoned for what they've done. Because what they've done to the Jewish people was so bad that they now have this fear of not seeming to be on their side and giving them cover to prevent them from ever thinking that they will be anti-Semitic. This does not give them cover to carry on doing what they're doing. I'm referring to Israel, the state
Yep,
of
yep,
Israel.
yep,
They
yep,
cannot
yep.
do whatever they like. They cannot.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the problem that Germany has now created for themselves in forgetting their own history of what they did in Southwest Africa.
I should also preface that they did something similar to a body in Tanzania, modern day Tanzania now.
Yeah, of course.
So it goes on to tell you that there's a pattern of
There's a
behavior,
pattern of
and
behavior.
so once you have that pattern in place,
You keep doing it.
you're likely to see the worst of what you've done as the ceiling, like you said, and anything below that,
It's nothing.
that's just that's a stroll in the park.
It's a stroll in the park. As I said when I called in to local radio here in the UK during the week, I pointed to Dr. Gerald Horn's work on Texas. Dr. Gerald Horn teaches at university. He's the Moores Professor of History and African American Studies. And his book, The Counter Revolution of 1836, he cites the extermination of between 30 to 40, if not more, ethnic nations who no longer exist. And he gives the list of the names of these groups of people. Many,
Mm.
I don't know any of them, maybe one or two. And then should we add Palestinians to the list? These people once existed. We sat by and watched them die live on television and did nothing.
So, based on what we have now, in terms of the ruling itself, which is that Israel ceases to continue its military actions and against the Palestinians, do you think there is recourse for any body of people in the world? I mean, specifically, I'll mention the Rohingyas in Burma, sorry, Myanmar,
Myanmar.
the the Uyghur too in China might have a say. Uh, the people of Donbass might also have a say. Who else? Even the South Americans, the people at the border.
Yeah, of course. This is a huge issue, really, for people struggling for self-determination.
Hmm.
Are they allowed to exist? Are they allowed to be governed by themselves, to choose their own leaders, to choose their own representatives?
Hmm.
The Israeli government said they are not occupying Gaza. Okay. Who switched off the water?
Hmm.
Who blockaded the food, the medical supplies? You may say that you're not in Gaza, but you've encircled them. This is why it's been referred to by David Cameron, who was a Prime Minister of UK at the time, who is now the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, said that this is an open air prison. So these people are enclosed. They have what crime did they commit? Is the first question to ask. Where's their self-determination? And as we mentioned all the other cases, we remember what the international bodies or states said with Ukraine incursion into Ukraine. Sorry, Russia's incursion into Ukraine. They acted. Sanctions were levied. Bank accounts were frozen. International travel bans were issued because they thought what Russia has done is heinous. Now the duplicity comes by them not acting in a similar manner with Israel. This is why they now have the charge of hypocrisy being leveled at them.
Hmm.
So other cases, as you mentioned, the Myanmar case with the Rohingya, they ruled in the same way that the genocide, this should not go on. We could then talk
Yep.
about what's happening in the Congo, in Sudan, currently going on. We could mention our brothers and sisters struggling in Haiti still.
Mm-hmm. There you go. The national based order.
Where's the law and order?
Speaking of Haiti, you've heard
Yes.
of the case in the Supreme Court?
Or from Kenya, yes, to deny it is illegal for any police to be deployed to another country, specifically Haiti and any other country. They were being asked to go and provide assistance to the Haitian government, the interim government, who have not been voted for since the assassination of Jovenel Moise several years ago. So Haiti is fractured right now, with many armed groups vying for control of the island against those very people who assassinated their president.
Hmm.
The country has a long and a righteous history of struggle,
Hmm.
fighting off and defending themselves against the French, 1791 to 1804.
Hmm.
A long struggle. Invasion by United States of America, 1915 to 1934. Occupation. So as people fight for their self-determination, we can see many peoples around the world also struggling to be free from the grasp of a colonial imperial way of thinking and being.
When that question was actually posed, which is you're shoring up the rule-based order, it takes my mind back to the League of Nations becoming
Mhm.
the United Nations. Subsequently, and we must understand that it didn't just become the League of Nations. It was actually a conversation that started between Roosevelt and
Yes.
President Roosevelt, U.S. President Roosevelt, and was it? No, sorry, I said Roosevelt, Eisenhower, and what's his name? Was the was the we should never surrender. We should
Churchill.
fight on the beaches. We should fight.
Winston Churchill.
Winston Churchill, yes. And the conversation between them, which led to the understanding now known as the Atlantic Charter. The Atlantic Charter will then lead to, subsequently, throws the League of Nations into, as part of reform, that's the word that were used then, the United Nations, which then gave us the 5 members of the Security Council coming out of the Second World War. and subsequently the World Bank, the IMF, the General Agreements on Trade and Tariffs, which subsequently became the World Trade Organization, and most importantly, the enforcer itself, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization,
NATO.
NATO. Now, that used to be the prism through which the rules-based world order was seen. Now, if these people cannot, or this group of bodies cannot be seen to uphold that understanding or that idea of what the how the world should operate, what is there else to do?
Well, other countries have already started to take measures since the sanctions that were placed on Russia, the Federation.
Hmm.
BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, was already in place.
Mhm.
This sanctioning of Russia forced them to turn to their neighbor, China, to reaffirm their commitment and their friendship. The Nord Stream pipeline was sabotaged.
Hmm.
The esteemed journalist, Seymour Hersh, points the finger squarely at the United States of America
Hmm.
for its destruction. And then we could see documented evidence of the President of the United States of America saying that we can get it done. So as countries now come to the realization that if you remain in this international rules-based order, your assets will be frozen because everybody trades in dollars. Afghanistan was occupied for 20 years by the United States of America. And when they left, the Taliban came back into power. And then subsequently, the United States of America froze millions, if not billions, of their financial funding, which means that children can't get their necessary provisions. People can't buy food because the government doesn't have access to its money.
Mhm.
And so if this continues to be the way that the world operates, and we know that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, has largely only acted to take action against African leaders. But everybody knows the illegal war in Iraq, the invasion by the United States of America under George Bush, has seen nobody from the American administration sanctioned.
Mm.
So what do the rules actually mean? They're for everybody else, but not for you. If that's the case, as Dr. Naledi Pandor, Foreign Secretary of South Africa, says, you can't have a rule that works only for you and not for us. This is no way to operate. Everybody has to be abiding by those laws and those rules, or it can't work.
Exactly. We have no system.
They have no system. So the BRICS nations who've now implemented or extended the greeting to further few nations, Egypt, Ethiopia, Argentina declined, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. More countries are willing to join in because they see that the global north is behaving in a way that is antithetical to their existence.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is a problem. So how are they supposed to behave? How are they supposed to act? Well, have to create their own currency, operate and trade within themselves with their own currency and bypassing the dollar, the petrodollar, which is what they are doing. So meanwhile, the global north, the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, these things may still carry on, but
True.
it doesn't mean that everybody has to abide or trade in those currencies which are held by the United States of America. So this is going to be a wider conversation that will go on, and we'll see how that unfolds in the next coming months and years, because it's a big uptaking by China, Russia, South Africa, India, and Brazil, so that there can be more equity in the world, because there's an imbalance of equity.
Okay.
This is a part of the massive problem.
Okay, so we've seen South Africa taking um, an amicus brief, which is, third party brief on behalf of the Palestinians to
Yes.
the to the ICJ.
And they were compelled to do so because they are signatories of the Convention Against Genocide. They were compelled, otherwise they would have to report themselves and they could be held in contempt by not
Of
doing
course.
so.
Yeah.
Any country who's a signatory should have brought this case. This is the problem. But
So
South
South
Africa,
Africa, so South
they've
Africa
acted.
has acted. Okay.
They've acted.
Okay. So now, and that's in the legal framework, right? So outside of the legal framework, we have the Houthis.
We should refer to them as their proper name, the Ansrala.
Okay. The Andrala,
The Ansrala.
who have decided that, okay, we don't do wigs, we don't do amicus brief, we do
They're
whatever
doing
the language of the mighty.
their language of the fighter. They're doing war is politics with violence. But funnily enough, even though there was an attack this evening on a ship, on a US ship, which caught
There was
fire.
one yesterday.
There was one today as well.
Oh, okay.
But that ship has managed to no injuries, no deaths that I can recall being recorded, and the ship has managed to get away from
Was
the
it
area.
military or
I think it might have been a military ship.
which one? The one today or the one?
To the one today that I heard being briefed. Yeah.
Okay.
So as you said, the Yemeni government have
Mm.
decided to act on behalf of the Palestinians because, as I was listening to Dr. Norman Finkelstein yesterday, he said between 2015 and 2018, 600,000 Yemeni people were killed.
Yeah, incessant bombing, isn't it?
No, 60% of them died by starvation. 60% of them died by starvation in 3 years.
Blockade.
By blockade. So they understand the plight that the Palestinians are now going through. Cholera is on the rise. Chickenpox is on the rise. Diarrheas and all sorts of diphtherias are on the rise. Winter is approaching into the Khan Yunis camp where they've been compelled to flee to, which is still being heavily bombed. Northern Gaza no longer exists, if people care to look on the map to see before and after pictures. So Yemen has said, we know how this feels. Because Saudi Arabia has been bombing Yemen for the last 10 years via sales of weapons from both the United States of America and the United Kingdom in the first instance. Now they're bombing them directly as a result of the Yemenis diverting ships away from Israel, who may be carrying weapons and arms that will be used to kill Palestinians. This is what they have said themselves. If there's a ceasefire, they will stop blockading any of the ships, which are now forced to go via the Horn of Africa. So the problem is wider. Many insurance companies have said that they will no longer insure any vessels traveling through that region. So yes, that's very, very big, because now it's affecting the financial implications and the insurance consequences. Many United States of America insurance companies have pulled out of insurance ships going through the Red Sea.
So how are we going to get our iPhones or our iPods?
Well, we'll have to wait a little bit longer.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really serious.
Yeah, the commodity prices will go up, of course. But meanwhile, those young people and women and children and men are still being killed. But we should not be sitting here, in our comfortable places with all these devices that we communicate with, and not spare a thought for those who can't even have clean water.
Yeah, but we do our own little charity drive from You know, children
Yeah.
in need.
Children in need, yes.
Yeah, take what take from the world, and drop
And then
a
give it back to
drop
them as charity, yes.
drop a nickel in their bucket from time to time,
From time to time.
and
The whole thing is upside down. The whole thing is upside down. And, these charities who mean well,
Mm,
they think they mean well, are also part of the problem. If we
of
stop doing the bombing, then the charities will cease to exist. They will find other means of existence and do other things, which will be worthy, of course. But asking people to put their hands in their pocket to fund the digging of water wells, meanwhile, the people are being impoverished because of bombing somewhere. Groups of factional groups are fighting, which causes
mm,
people to flee. And then they flee into other countries, which then
mm,
say, we don't want these refugees and these migrants. Well, that's okay. Then stop forcing them to leave their place of origin. Then they won't come to your
true,
country.
true, true, true. But then, you know, this side of the world, we have a very good PR machine. We have
Oh,
one
yes.
way of spinning
Oh, yes.
it.
Oh,
you know,
yes.
we'll give Brad and Mark the chance to call in on their radio show and
Yes.
spout their opinions on
Yeah,
things that are fact based.
yes.
That you can see right in front of you, numbers, stats.
That doesn't matter. You and I both know that those don't matter. We've gone through Brexit. Those things don't matter.
You can't make this stuff up. You know, you're telling this guy how 2 and 2 is 4. Boy, I don't agree. What? What do you mean? What do you mean you don't agree? No, no, no. I have a contrary opinion. What?
Oh dear, it's really disheartening to
You-
have to witness all of this live. It's a game. It really is a game for some of them. The commentators, they encourage these people to call their shows
I mean,
to make fools of themselves, so they can
you,
make YouTube clips or Instagram clips, right?
there was, I mean, speaking to the topic where there was one yesterday, I think it was on Sheila Fogarty's
Mm.
program, and this guy called the eloquence, the beauty of language, and yet completely stupid.
That's
Trying
allowed.
to,
It's
trying
allowed.
to,
It's allowed. The two things can be true. You can be eloquent and don't know anything. That's okay.
this bright human being was trying to eloquently break down what a genocide means
Yes,
and saying what is currently happening does not constitute genocide because, according to him, again, opinion, voice, opinion. Sometimes I can't, you know, it used to be the thing then that you were ashamed to be stupid.
no, not any longer. They
It
don't
used
even
to,
recognize that. They don't even recognize that they're stupid. They don't recognize. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. Their opinion is what must be heard. It must be said, and they forcefully say it.
yeah, I understand. I mean, I understand the need to democratize stupidity, but sometimes you don't need to put this thing out there. It's um a great teacher of ours, Dr. Greka, will often say, sometimes don't open your mouth and put your brain on display. Just, you know,
It's very difficult. That's a skill to be able to keep quiet and listen. That's a skill.
mm,
And when you are in the dominant group
mm,
and you can see that your country has done what it's done, and you think they're right to have done what they have done. We can take case in point yesterday. Museums are offering to loan back to Ghana, things that Britain stole. Loan, not give back. Loan. When you have this type of mentality, and I've had this discussion with people on Twitter, what will we get if we give back the Benin bronzes? Peace of mind. It doesn't occur to them that you can't go to somebody's place of dwelling, the Benin Kingdom, ransack the place, lay waste to the people, remove all of the artifacts, which they said that couldn't have been created by the people who lived there because savages. Not knowing the history of this region goes back hundreds of years, 9th century, 8th century. These craftsmanship that is all your peoples have in that region. And just plunder them, cart them off to the British Museum and say, look, we will sell some to the highest bidder. They end up in Germany, they end up in America, they end up in Australia, and so on and so forth. They've offered to loan back to Ghana that which they stole. Is the height of insult, which allows these people to come on to national radio and to speak with no knowledge. As you said, it's easy to open your mouth and talk when you don't know much. And they're encouraged to do so because they've never been told not to do it. And we need to encourage them to keep quiet. By any means necessary, as good brother Malcolm X would often say. We need to encourage them to be quiet. We could take many books. I have many by my hand. This one by Dr. Gerald Horne, one of our favorite scholars, a historian, a lawyer, and in his previous life, a journalist.
Yeah, but what does he know?
Oh, not much at all, it would seem. As you can see, I have 2 shelves full of Dr. Horne books at the top there.
Yeah. Come on. Yeah.
He doesn't know much at all.
It's got bias.
He's biased.
Yeah. He's a liberal, you know.
Oh, of course. We can't give him any airtime.
No, you don't. There's liberals. I mean, you know, it's one of the reasons why this platform exists, and because if you look at it, you know, we're speaking knowledge here, and most of the stuff we've spoken about can be found in books, in articles, in interviews.
Yes.
So it's not like us coming on like Brad and just say, you know, I feel this is no.
This whole system is crumbling. I often say, if you can witness children, as I did one day, as I was doing my local shopping, walking into a local supermarket to go and help themselves of 2 croissants and eat and leave without paying. There should be no hunger in the United Kingdom, but poverty is of a level that has never been seen for generations.
I mean, it used to be the case that someone would say, if you go into Tesco and you cannot afford anything, then the country is in crisis.
In crisis.
By what you said there, then you know we're there anyway. And so, funny enough, you mentioned the Beanie bronzes, which brings me to possibly the next topic we're gonna do. And the reason why that is the case is it was February that the Benin punitive expedition to use the word that was used,
punitive
punitive expeditions that made us have, why am I using us, that made the Brits have custody of the Beanie bronzes happened. And so we'll pass a number of books. We've got what's his name?
Professor Hicks. Yes, Professor Hicks.
We've got
Barnaby Phillips.
We've got
Paddy Doherty.
Paddy Doherty. So Eagle and I we'll synchronize watches and we'll
come
do
back again
some.
to
We'll
delve
come
into
back
that
again.
topic.
Yeah, it's
Definitely.
Saturday we'll hope to do it Saturday.
Yes.
So give them a level of consistency. We'll do it next Saturday. And yes, so that's something for people to look out for. Benin bronzes. Again, Benin bronzes in British custody, a breakdown will be the topic of that. So, and any famous last words?
What we should hope to see in the days coming ahead, it will be the responses, as we've seen from many of the governments, many in favor of the ruling from the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, that it is a momentous and historic occasion and a ruling that not many people thought would see the light as such it was, with such massive verdict in support of the case brought by South Africa. Maybe people thought might be 8-7, 7 to, they thought it would be tight in many of the rulings. It wasn't tight at all. It was unanimous. It was clear. It was clear. So we will wait to see what the response. We know the response from the international community. And when we say the international community, we should be very specific. We're talking about the global north. That international community is at loggerheads with the global south international community. And that is in display at the General Assembly in the United Nations and again here. So we will see how this plays out. The human rights body in the United States of America is currently taking President Biden to court for complicity. The case that South Africa has brought, they have extended that to bring cases against the United States of America and the United Kingdom for their complicity. So this has not stopped. And we've been hearing from Chile, they may bring a case. Colombia may bring a case. We will see what happens. We will see what happens. So there's going to be a lot of movement in the next coming months because this is just the beginning. It's just the beginning. So
okay. And so yeah, thank you for dropping by and sharing your thoughts. And
no problem. My pleasure.
A brilliant submission. I would like to leave the final word with South Africa's Nelson Mandela when he said in 1996 that South Africa's freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. And so his countrymen and women
have done them proud.
Have done him proud.
They've done him proud.
Yes.
Amandla.
Yeah. Aluta continua victoria seta, as they would say.
Away to.
Yes.
Peace, my brother. We'll be back.
Thank you.